Greetings aspirants, welcome to Narayana IAS, the one-stop destination for all of your UPSC Civil Service examination requirements. This is Anand Krishna and we have chosen certain important articles from Delhi editions of Indian Express and the Hindu. Moving on to the articles that we have chosen for today's discussion. The first article that we have chosen is from the Indian Express, appearing on page number 11, and this article is titled as Our Burdened Children. As you may realize, this article is clearly focusing upon the new pilot study that the CBSE is planning with regard to the examination pattern, where they have tried to introduce what is referred to as open book examination. It is in this particular context this article is being discussed. The second article is chosen from the Hindu, where this project of 10,000 genome has been completed as said by the government. We will be looking into the ramifications of this particular development, which is published on the page number 1 of the Hindu. The third article that we have chosen is again from the Hindu, which is particularly from the ecology point of view, where the Simlipal National Park is seeking more female tigers from the other regions. Specifically, as you can identify, this is dealing with the concern of genetic diversity related to all these protected species, particularly in this case the tigers. The fourth article is from again the Hindu, where it is referring to the increased necessity of funding the basic science and its research and development in India. As you clearly see, this article has been written from the context of the National Science Day that is being celebrated today. The last and final article that we have chosen again is from the Hindu, where there are newfound obelisks which are joining these viruses and viroids as third unusual life form. And we will be dealing into this particular article particularly from the prelims perspective, which has been published in the science page of the Hindu. And at the end, you will be having some of the practice questions both in terms of the MCQs and also the descriptive question. We shall now move to the discussion over the articles. Dear students, embark on your UPSC journey with Narayana IAS Academy. Our esteemed 5-year and 3-year integrated programs are now open for admissions in Hyderabad, Vijayawada and Nellore. Our courses include robust R&D backed initiatives such as daily news analysis, daily news review, which are comprehensive review program for a broader understanding of our day-to-day happenings, which are current affairs. Similarly, we have NCERT program, which is a foundational course that covers all the NCERT syllabi, which is crucial for UPSC preparation. We also have a mentorship program for personalized guidance, and we also have a regular test series for systematic learning and assessment of the student. So begin your journey to become a leader with Narayana IAS Academy today. Embark on this journey, make your dream come into a reality with Narayana IAS Academy. Moving to the first article, we will discuss this article published in Indian Express, which is titled Our Burdened Children. As you clearly see, this article is trying to focus upon the issues in the primary education, and this article is significant from GS2 point of view, where the government policies and interventions for development in various sectors and issues arising out of their design and implementation can be one aspect. On the other hand, even issues relating to the development and management of social sector or services relating to health, education and human resources is the another aspect. From both of these perspectives, this article is significant. Look at this previous year question asked in 2016. Professor Amartya Sen has advocated important reforms in the realms of primary education and primary healthcare. What are your suggestions to improve their status and performance? As you see in this particular context, the Central Board of Secondary Education, that is CBSE, as we have already read in the newspapers, that has decided to conduct a pilot study. What this pilot study is all about? This pilot study is trying to test the feasibility of what is referred to as open book examination. For which classes? For classes from 9th to 12th. And as you see, this particular reform, it is being seen as a welcome step towards learning without burden for many students. That means simple reform, as you are seeing in this particular news, is being held as a major reform, by which it means that there are certain fundamental and structural lacunae within this so-called education sector, and within that the primary education is having more of such lacunae. We will look into those issues. Their design and their implementation is what the problematic in this particular aspect. As you move ahead, the clarity would be there as to what sort of design and implementation has to happen and what must be their objective if you look at the constitutional mandate. Firstly, as Article 350A, which has been inserted by the 7th Constitutional Amendment Act 1956, has stated, the language is something which is being converted into medium for instruction. Instruction of what? Instruction of the knowledge. As this instruction has to happen, this instruction can be in their mother tongue. For whom? For particularly those who belong to the section of linguistic minorities. This is true for every community and every section of the society which has specific language for their communication. So this one particular aspect that we have to keep in mind, that this constitutional mandate through this particular amendment is trying to establish that learning in this particular medium of their own mother tongue would give them more clarity and more understanding, as simple as that. Second one, as you move ahead, this also includes some portion of 243G through this 11th schedule, wherein the women and child development is another function that the local governments have to take up. As you also know that under Article 350A, this medium of instruction has to be their mother tongue. Here also there is a role for the local governments. It is the extension of this particular role as you see in the 11th schedule, meaning the primary education would flourish when local governments have more say and better participation in designing the way it functions. Third, as you clearly have Article 21A, which is guaranteeing right to education as fundamental right for a particular age group. It says that the state shall provide free and compulsory education. The free education and compulsory education is to make sure that participation of all the stakeholders in education would occur pertaining to these children which are of the age of 6 to 14 years. And the manner in which it must happen will be determined by the state in the form of a law. This clearly sets the mandate for the state. As you move ahead, you also have two very important directive principles of state policy. The first principle is there in Article 39, and this again establishes the tone and tenor of what sort of primary education at least must be there in Indian educational framework. One, we have to recognize that the tender age of children must not be abused. Meaning, if I am having an educational framework which is taking away the fruits of my tender age, then I am violating this particular directive. Second, that children are given opportunities and facilities to develop in healthy manner and in conditions of freedom and dignity. The educational framework must be framed in such a way that they are developing in a healthy manner, meaning without any anxiety or stress. Second, they must develop in the conditions of freedom and dignity, whereby it means that there should not be any scope for punishment or penalty or pressure or stress in the educational framework. Third, the childhood and youth must be protected against the exploitation and also against the moral and material abandonment, meaning the educational framework must be in such a way that ultimately either exploitation or a kind of moral abandonment. The Article 45 is just an extension of this particular mandate, whereby the provision for early childhood care and education to children below the age of 6 years must also be taken care of. And this is another directive that has been issued to the state. As you see these all articles and their mandates, clearly education objectively must have three fundamental characteristics. One, it must have this characteristic of enabling the child to develop in a manner which is healthy, which is out of freedom and also with lot of dignity. Second, there has to be a strong role for the state, not only for the age groups which have been mentioned with regard to the primary education, but also even for the other age groups. Third, as you saw in the previous article, there is also an emancipated role that has been attributed to even the local governments, and the medium of instruction, as it has been clearly specified, even though is of political in nature, clearly it has its role in the establishment of democratic educational framework. Moving ahead, what we have as part of this constitutional mandate has translated into the national educational policy. It is very, very clear that National Educational Policy 2020 is trying to incorporate these paradigms. There is one stressful thing that has been on the basis of this directive issued in Article 39, the NEP has envisaged a particular paradigm shift. That is, it is laying stress on transiting from rote-based information gathering to competency-based learning and developing analytical skills. I repeat, it is laying stress upon transiting from rote-based information gathering by which it means that the present education system seems to be having certain structural redundancies where it is leading to this rote-based information gathering alone. From here, it has to move to the competency-based learning and development of analytical skills. This would happen only when there are certain far-reaching reforms. What is that? We will see in the next slide. Second, this NEP has also mandated and emphasized on making learning processes more student and teacher centric, which means that the previous processes on the basis of this rote-based information gathering as learning process had certain structural redundancies wherein the student-centric and teacher-centric learning process did not occur. Now it is envisaging to be it so. Third, as you have these particular two far-reaching reforms to be implemented, it will lead to the third reform. The processes and institutions of learning, such as schools or colleges, shouldn't aggravate older forms of inequality and work as against the recommended inclusivity-centered approach, meaning this rote learning which is leading to information gathering and the learning which is not student-centric and teacher-centric will automatically lead to such processes and such institutions which are houses of inequality and injustice in terms of educational aspects and in terms of educational outcomes. And in place of this, NEP 2020 is recommending an approach which is inclusive by character and structure. Finally, once you implement these three, it says the periodic upscaling of teachers' skills become more fundamental. If I have to replace this rote-based learning with a kind of competency-based learning, it involves a lot of questions, and developing analytical skills involves a lot of understanding. For all these, the role of teacher becomes central rather than any other instrument. It is these which have been mandated by NEP 2020, catering to the constitutional mandate. Now we will see what are those issues which were there in the primary education or the child education. One, the primary problem with the current education system as identified by the Yashpal committee, which has gone through all these problems and attempted to reduce the burden on the child in terms of this primary education, is that the child has not been recognized as a social category, but rather it has been, or she has been recognized as a biological category. What does it mean? Remember, education will occur in the conditions of society and culture. If society is violent prone, if society is prone to the caste, if the society is prone to gender biases, if all of these are the societal and cultural characteristics, then within these conditions alone, the system of education will function. And within this particular system, the child who is going to receive the education will be also getting such education. On the other hand, child is also nurtured by our future vision. As we see that the current society and culture are not catering to the justified way of living, we see that this is what we are visualizing for future. So this visualization is also from our end, again from the perspectives of society and culture. So there are two or twin challenges that the child is going through. Education is not flowing from him or his centric, but it is flowing from the top, and the top is deciding what sort of education has to be, given the fact that it is the present culture which is conditioning them, it is the future culture and society which we are visualizing will nurture them. It is within this his education is occurring, and hence as these two are social aspects, child first of all has to be recognized as a social category rather than a biological category for the purposes of education, or to be precise, primary education. Second, once you identify this, then we can identify what is the current challenges with regard to this education alone. As it is flowing from the society and culture itself, the present form of education is catering to such society and such culture. This has become the objective of education, and hence it remains lot biased. And as this has been identified, this bias would be flowing through certain instruments of education, and that instrument becomes the culture of that particular educational framework, which is referred to as textbook culture by the Yashpal committee. In this textbook culture, what you see is someone has identified what has to be there in the book. So they have included all this content into the book, and as they have included the knowledge which has to be imparted to the child in this textbook, the teacher would be asked to complete it by lesson, and at the end what you see is the final lesson would be completed, and the child will be asked to go through and complete the exercises which are written at the end. And the child is also expected in the form of assessment to test whether he could do this exercise well or not, even in the final examination. So the textbook culture has created a structure which is authoritative rather than democratic, completely going against the constitutional mandate as identified by the Yashpal committee. This is the burden that he is referring to. And now comes the role of the teacher. As the textbooks are there, now the teacher has to go through these textbooks and complete the lesson by lesson and completing the textbook. And this is what pertains to teaching to a child rather than giving him the opportunity to explore the child, depending upon the fact that each child is distinct and unique. Now it is getting uniformed, and this uniform structure of learning is what the creation of this textbook culture. And moving ahead from here, the learning of the child out of this used to be, and hence will be, the rote learning, and it would be information centric, and it would be testing his ability to remember. Now once you are testing the ability to remember, the test itself goes against the basic requirement of the education, that is understanding and applying your understanding to the problems of the society. This is how child gets distanced from the society, and it is this situation which is being conditioned by the society and culture, and this hence remains rotten as Yashpal committee has identified. Now comes the role of the examination and curriculum. Again, the examination would be on the basis of the textbooks. The centralized authority which has mandated these textbooks would be the one which would be the basis for this examination, and the curriculum again would be going and revolving around this particular examination. And as you see all of these, right from the first aspect to the last aspect, they have created a centralized system and applicable uniformly to the entire territory of India, wherein primary education and its learning would be rotten. It is this problem as it has been identified. Now there are certain consequences of this particular aspect. One, This poorly designed syllabus and textbooks would be leading to the unimaginative pedagogy, and this unimaginative pedagogy hence will lead to rote learning. And in this rote learning, what they would do is they would be going through this syndrome called as catch-up syndrome, as identified by R. Krishna Kumar, who was the former director of NCERT. In this catch-up syndrome, you would be attempting to catch up your marks rather than your understanding. Second, on top of these systemic factors, child also faces the stress of competitive ethos and competitive culture as imposed by the society itself. Because if you have this particular degree, then your status in the society would be recognized as above, particularly as you see in this with regard to the engineering and medical education. Moreover, the schools and the teachers which have to mitigate such situation and come up with the forward-looking and vision-oriented education, they also contribute to it by promoting an all-round competitive mentality. Exactly against this, the committee has recommended it to be child-specific and child-centric, wherein it is not about the competition but about exploring the children's skills, children's ability in whatever the respect that they have to be explored. So this breathless routine, as it points out, would be destroying the child's search for meaning in what is being taught. So the popularity of technology and the popularity of coaching, particularly post-COVID situation, has increased, and this has also added to the fire that is already existing, wherein they have introduced particularly new testing style, which is referred to as multiple choice template, where you will be given the ways to identify the right answer, and hence the student would be assuming that he has learned something when he is able to identify the right answer. Identifying the right answer becomes the objective rather than understanding the concept itself. This is what in simple terms it means. So there is little scope for even the teachers to focus upon understanding and give the students the pleasure of learning through active and interactive teaching. What is the way forward? As you clearly see, a teacher has lamented by looking at the answer sheet of a student, except for those errors and mistakes, nothing is of your writing and answers. As a teacher has lamented looking at the answer sheet of his student, except for your mistakes or wrongs, nothing in this answer is of your ownership, by which this teacher is stating that answer is written, and in this particular answer you have just reproduced the information. Wherever you did not remember the information, you have made an error, and it is this error which is what your ownership is, and it is this particular mistake that you are owning, and it is better to make these mistakes rather than writing that right answer whereby you are just reproducing the information. So this has been stated in the Rajya Sabha by R.K. Narayan when he was member of the upper house, wherein he says that these heavy school bags, based on the textbook culture and the long hours they spend doing the homework, where the exercises have to be completed rather than understanding the topics, and receiving extra tuition because they have to get the ultimate marks during their childhood, has ruined their childhood. And he says this should be labeled as national madness because this is true throughout India. Second, he attributes this madness to false conception of knowledge and poor curriculum design. That is what we have discussed earlier. Third, the Yashpal committee has discussed it now to be mutating into a broader subject, wherein this madness is now becoming a social anxiety, which again proves that child is a social being and the education is a social thing. So this has become an anxiety which is pervasive anxiety among parents, teachers and children. Now it has to do with the new economic and work environment, which is liberal and globalized in character, whereby the career opportunities are dwindling, the pressure to compete for the two, that is high status professions, old professions, that is medicine and engineering, has greatly increased, and this has catered to the way of wherein there is no proper curriculum framework and there is no proper structure for student to learn the understanding based knowledge that he has to get, whereby the commercial coaching has taken full advantage of this pressure, as Krishna Kumar, being the former director of NCERT, has pointed out, and this has raised the pressure or the anxiety that has been referred to as national madness to the hitherto unknown levels. Moving to the next article, we will discuss this 10,000 genome project having been completed as announced by the government. This article is important for your GS paper 2 from health perspective and what sort of interventions which are possible, and GS paper 3 from the science and technology perspective, wherein the effort towards indigenization of technology and development of new technologies out of this is also an important concern for our examination. Moving ahead, look at this previous year question. What are the research and developmental achievements in applied biotechnology? How will these achievements help to uplift the poorer sections of the society? As you clearly see in this particular question, whatever the new developments which occur either in terms of basic science or in terms of technology, their utility for the society is going to be an important concern for the examination. The context we have already seen, that the Department of Biotechnology, which had been the nodal agency which has spearheaded this particular project, has announced that the 10,000 genome project under Human Genome India initiative that we had, I repeat, Human Genome India initiative has been completed, and clearly this is an attempt to create a reference database of whole genome sequences out of India and their population groups. It is in this particular context we are discussing this. And as you see here, the government has announced that the attempt is again to create a reference database of whole genome sequences from India, number one, and number two, these genetic variants being unique to India and its population groups, this study is required. And number three, there were 20 institutions which were participating in this particular project, and IISc Bangalore, CCMB Hyderabad were leading the necessary coordination. Some prelims fodder that you see here. Moreover, as we have clearly seen that India having 1.3 billion population is incorporated into over 4,600 population groups. The main characteristic of these population groups is that most of them are endogamous by their social and cultural nature. Given this diversity and given this endogamy as a characteristic of these particular groups, what you see is the genetic variations that occur over time are specific to largely India and they are rare globally, and hence whatever the disease causing mutations that might have occurred in these particular groups might be specific to India. So they are more common within these certain Indian groups. This project helps us in identifying this and also having or finding a suitable and rational response to this. Given this particular news, we will look at what this genome is. In order to understand that, we have to go in a flow. Initially, we have to know what is referred to as the foundational genetic material, which is there in the basic unit of life called as cell. Within cell, you know that you have what is referred to as nucleus, and DNA and RNA are part and parcel of this entire genetic material. This DNA being the one which had all the genetic instructions which are necessary for the development, functioning, growth and reproduction of all living organisms, we refer to this as the basic genetic material. Second, on the basis of this genetic material, and if you decipher all this complete set of this genetic material, we define it as a genome, and we clearly see that this information is needed in order to understand how the organism is being built and how it is able to maintain itself biologically. Third, if you apply these definitions to the human genome, then there are 3 billion such DNA base pairs which are organized in this double helix structure, which form part of what is referred to as human genome. And the genome analysis is transforming certain fields such as biotechnology, medicine and agriculture, in the sense that whatever the disease mechanisms that we can understand out of this genome project will have a response in the form of biotechnology or in the form of the medicine such as the drug development, and this will also transform the agriculture by enhancing both production and productivity of not only the crops but also of even the livestock. Having understood this, we will move ahead and understand what this genome sequencing is. We clearly know that DNA is the basic material or genetic material, and this would be involving what is referred to as nucleotides or bases, which are forming part of structure of DNA. And there are 4 such basic genetic nucleotides which are referred to as A, T, C, G: adenine, thymine, cytosine and guanine, and they are part and parcel of an organism's genome. So in this genome sequencing, you will be determining the exact sequence of these 4 basic DNA nucleotides, nothing else. If you do this, then you have done what is referred to as genome sequencing. This genome sequencing, as we have clearly seen, tells you the relevant and required information that is pertinent for you to understand how the development, functioning and reproductioning of the organisms is occurring. And there are certain other applications also, as we have clearly seen, that this gives you some insights into the genetic diseases and hence consequentially even to the potential treatments which are possible. For example, with respect to our own groups, we have certain genetic mutations where these mutations are known as genes identified for certain diseases. Now, as you know this particular gene which is causing that particular disease, you can target the treatment. Similarly, there are genes which are identified for resistance. Resistance to what? Resistance to the medicines that you may use and the resistance to even the anesthesia that you may use during the surgical procedures. When you are having this information, then you can silence the gene or edit the gene in such a way that this resistance is being removed. So what you are trying to do is you are trying to move towards personalized healthcare and the precision medicine that is possible. All these are part and parcel of this genome sequencing project. India has completed her first such complete human genome sequencing in 2006, and the current project, as you clearly see, has been launched in order to create the database related to the genetic variations and mutations, and by this we are trying to identify the causes of diseases within the Indian population which is necessary for such genetic diversity. And this project has resulted in the creation of what is referred to as a biobank at the Center for Brain Research, IISc, which has housed nearly 20,000 blood samples for future research. We have to keep in mind some very, very important facts, and these facts form part of the very basis of this entire understanding. 99.9% of the genetic material is having similarity in all the human beings. So the variation is possible only to the extent of 0.1% alone. This is the first thing that you have to keep in mind. Second, even though it is a mere 0.1% of the genetic material which is showing some variation, given the large amount of population, even this is suffice to understand what is the genetic causes for certain diseases and what is the genetic causes for certain resistance that we find, and also to understand how to improve crop productivity and livestock productivity, as we have seen earlier. Second, this variation technically is referred to as polymorphism. This is the second prelims fodder that you have to keep in mind as a technical term. Third, we also know that once we have completed this entire human genome project, we have identified that it is merely 20,500 genes which are specific to what is called as protein creation or their synthesis. This is another fact that we have to keep in mind, wherein our focus could be clearly on such genomes which are active in this particular synthesis. As you clearly see, all these enable us to come towards what is referred to as precision medicine and personalized healthcare. This is the end objective of this particular project. Moving to the next article, we'll discuss this. Simlipal seeks more female tigers from other regions. We'll look into this topic because this is important from your ecology and environment point of view, and we have seen number of questions emerging from current affairs, particularly for ecology, both in preliminary and main examination. As you clearly know that this is referring to what is referred to as pseudo-melanistic tigers, and then it is also referring to the Simlipal tiger reserve, both in terms of its preliminary fodder and also in terms of its utility with regard to writing an answer can also be understood through this article. Look at this previous year question. Which of the following are in Agasthyamala Biosphere Reserve? As you clearly see the similarity in terms of this topic and the question. Neyar, Pepara and Shendurni Wildlife Sanctuaries and Kalakkad Muduntarai Tiger Reserve. Second, Mudumalai, Satyamangalam and Wayanad Wildlife Sanctuaries and Silent Valley National Park. As you clearly see, Biosphere Reserve is the major definition or segment that you have within the ecosystems, and below which lies both national parks, wildlife sanctuaries and certain other reserves that you announce. As you clearly see, the third option is saying Kaundinya, Gundla Brahmeshwaram and Papikonda Wildlife Sanctuaries and Mukurti National Park. Fourth one, Kaval and Sri Venkateshwara Wildlife Sanctuaries and Nagarjun Sagar Srisailam Tiger Reserve. What is the context? Odisha government has expressed a concern. What is that concern? This concern is with regard to the presence of significant number of pseudo-melanistic tigers in the Simlipal Tiger Reserve. What is this pseudo-melanism? As you clearly see that it is a variant of pigmentation. Pigmentation as a process which is related to the formation of skin and its color and characteristics. And this pigmentation is identifiable either by the dark spots or enlarged stripes over the skin of the tiger. Second, so this particular identifiable dark spots or enlarged stripes are in fact the morbid deposition of black matter, and this morbid deposition is often found as a malignant character causing pigmented tumors, meaning cancer causing, and this is referred to as melanosis, and hence the state government is worried. This is the first aspect that you have to know. Second, this melanistic tigers or pseudo-melanistic tigers are in fact attributed to the efforts of inbreeding. That means on the one hand, this inbreeding effort is trying to increase their population, but on the other hand, it also had certain adverse consequence as this that you are observing. Second, it has affected many adult tigers in Simlipal. Third, as we have already seen, this is characterized by wide and merged stripes. Now, if you look at the statistics of tigers in Odisha, you can clearly see the importance of this administrative division being part and parcel of the larger ecosystem which was catering to this tiger population. By All Odisha Tiger Estimation Report, we have nearly 30 tigers in the state's forest, and the Simlipal Tiger Reserve houses the largest share with almost 24 adult tigers. So, the Odisha government is proposing that the National Tiger Conservation Authority must intervene, and this must intervene to make sure that there is introduction of female tigers from other landscapes such that they may lead to what is referred to as genetic diversity within this particular tiger reserve, because in-house breeding is creating the narrowness in the genetic diversity that has to be there. Are there any existing initiatives to tackle this pseudo-melanism? In 2018, Odisha government has initiated a program referred to as Satkosia. Keep in mind this particular expression, to introduce 3 pairs of tigers from Madhya Pradesh. One pair has got successfully relocated, but another tiger fell victim to the poacher traps, and hence this highlights what are the challenges which are present in order to implement even this particular proposal. The Simlipal Tiger Reserve and its features are also important for your preliminary examination. Let us look into those preliminary details. Its name is arriving from this tree referred to as simul, which means a silk cotton. Second, this has been designated as a tiger reserve way back in 1956. Third, this has been brought under Project Tiger in 1973, and then it has been declared as a biosphere reserve or part of biosphere reserve in 1994, and this is part of UNESCO World Network of Biosphere Reserves since 2009. All these prelims fodder are important for the examination. Then we also have what is referred to as Simlipal Kuldiha Hadgad Elephant Reserve, and this is part and parcel of Simlipal National Park. This is also known as Mayurbhanj Elephant Reserve. This encompasses, as you clearly see, Simlipal Tiger Reserve, Hadagad Wildlife Sanctuary and Kuldiha Wildlife Sanctuary. All these are significant for your preliminary examination. And as part of geographic location, this geographic location is also prominent. It is part of, as you already know, Odisha's Mayurbhanj district, and however, we know that this is geographically located at the eastern end of the Eastern Ghats. This you have to keep in mind. This particular biosphere reserve is vital, as you clearly know, for its ecological significance and its biodiversity, and specifically it's a vital habitat for the Bengal tigers, and there are such other numerous wildlife species. Moreover, the conservation efforts that we are referring to as the way forward with respect to the Simlipal National Park, which includes even the Project Tiger and also the UNESCO World Network of Biosphere Reserves related conservation efforts. And the government's proposal must be considered by the Tiger Conservation Authority of India, and this will prove important for the vitality and significance of the Simlipal Tiger Reserve. Moving to the next article, we look into this article titled "Why Science Needs Sustainable Funding." As we clearly see, India is aiming to become what is referred to as developed nation by 2047, and we are referring to this as Amrit Kal. In order to make sure that you are becoming a developed nation, we have to make sure that the most important prerequisite to attain such status has to be the higher investments in research and development, and this has to be led by particularly the private sector. We look into the details. As you clearly see, this article is important from mains examination point of view and also even for the preliminary examination point of view, wherein the data related to how much of spending out of GDP is actually going towards the research and development in India. We see that the prerequisite in order to indigenize technology and also in order to develop new technology, this economic angle related to R&D is significant. And also this is, as I said, is important even for the sustainable development aspect. Why? We will see in the details. The context is, as we know that we are celebrating National Science Day today, and this is to commemorate the discovery of the Raman effect by Indian physicist Sir C.V. Raman on February 28, 1928. In 2024, for this particular year's celebration of Science Day, the theme had been chosen as Science for Sustainable Development. Hence, that particular expression. As you move ahead, what you observe is, even though you are calling for Science for Sustainable Development, this would be possible only when India is able to resolve her own funding related paradox towards the R&D expenditure. What is this particular paradox? As you clearly see here, the gross domestic expenditure on research and development as a percentage of GDP. I repeat, gross domestic expenditure on R&D as a percentage of GDP, which is referred to as GERD as a percentage of GDP, was growing at a very slow rate. However, it did not even cross that level of 1% of GDP. Whatever the higher expenditure that we have attained as a percentage of GDP was way back in 2008, 2009, 2010 financial years. After that, what you have seen is the gradual decline in the amount of expenditure over the R&D as percentage of GDP. And as of now, as you see, clearly it has come down even to the extent of 0.64%. Now, as you see this particular data, the actual spending is declining. However, the government claims that as per this policy of 2013, Science, Technology and Innovation Policy, as it has noted, this GERD, that is gross expenditure on research and development as a percentage of GDP, must increase to these levels of 2% of GDP, and this has been announced as a national goal. This is the paradox that we are referring to. As you clearly see, as against this particular goal, the current levels of 0.64% of GDP has been seen from the levels of 0.8% in 2008-2009 and then 0.7% in 2017-2018. This decline in R&D alongside the targeted national goal that we have announced, both of them clearly show this kind of paradox. Now, what is the optimum level of spending that you observe and that you see that which can take India on the path of development and then become a developed nation by 2047? The Anusandhan Foundation of India, as it has been announced, has demarcated these levels of 3% of GDP as expenditure going towards the research and development in India. This is the ideal level of expenditure that India has to incur in order to emerge as a developed nation by 2047. And remember, this has to continue until this particular year, that is 2047. As you see this paradox, then we have to analyze the reasons why such paradox is existing. The first such reason is the way in which we evaluate projects which are research and development oriented. As it is said, it is flawed, number one. Number two, alongside, whenever the government come up with or departments come up with their demands for grants, as you see that their evaluation is either erroneous or implementation level challenges that they face. This particular demand for grant would become again erroneous in terms of their demands, and hence much of the amount remains unspent with most of the departments. For example, for the previous financial year itself, the Department of Biotechnology was able to spend just above the 70% of the demand for grants that it has demanded. Similar is the case with regard to even the Department of Earth Sciences and many other such departments. Moving ahead, thus this R&D spending comparison that we have made would clearly establish this paradox, and the solution also lies in the way in which we have to proceed from here on. As you clearly see, the requirement is of what is referred to as the optimum spending in R&D expenditure. This optimum grants and the optimum spending would be possible when there is increased private participation in such R&D expenditure. If you look at the expenditure split up for this year of 2020-2021, the private sector was participating to the extent of 36% of this gross expenditure on R&D as a percentage of GDP. However, this entire effort towards R&D was led by the union government. The role of the state governments was meager, and the higher education sector and the public sector industry, where their role had to be higher and higher, was showing just a meager levels of expenditure or negligible levels of expenditure. So what are those challenges? There is a high reliance on the public funding, which you can clearly observe. Second, there is inefficiency in utilization of the funds. If we address both of these, where there is increased participation of the private sector, and then there is also the reduction in the inefficiency of the departments in spending or utilizing the funds which have been allocated to those departments, this would lead to the better way of and prosperous way of moving towards healthy R&D expenditure as a percentage of GDP, taking India towards this status of developed nation. There is another aspect that you have to keep in mind. If you look at this particular state sector, where the expenditure, even though has gradually increased, over time it has getting stagnated. This is another aspect that you have to remember. Third, with respect to higher education sector, the growth had been very meager, and private sector participation is also meager. And what you see with regard to central sector is the R&D expenditure is declining. All these patterns have to be changed in a rational way, in such a way that the participation of private sector increases, the state expenditure is also increasing, and the higher education is getting more and more funding towards research and development. This would give the better approach towards this theme, which is referred to as the science for sustainable development. Moving to the last article, we will discuss this titled Newfound Obelisks Join Viruses, Viroids as Third Unusual Life Form. If you look at the life as it is, we know that there are certain characteristics which distinguish life from the non-life forms as we observe. But as this particular article has been published, what we see is over time we may even blur this distinction between life and the non-life forms. This particular article is primarily focusing upon the preliminary aspects of the examination, particularly from general science point of view. Look at these previous year questions. In 2017, this has been asked. Consider the following statements. In tropical regions, Zika virus disease is transmitted by the same mosquito that transmits dengue. Second, sexual transmission of Zika virus disease is possible. Which of the statements given above is are correct? Look at this particular context. As we have already discussed, the scientists at Stanford University, the first prelims fodder that you have to keep in mind. It is the scientists of Stanford University who have reported this research with regard to what they term as obelisks. Please keep in mind this expression. Second, as you read here, they are extremely simple and unusual forms of life, meaning whatever the life form that we are, these are the life forms which are very complex, and these have become complex over the natural evolution over vast periods of time. But on the other hand, what you are seeing is these are the simplistic forms, number one, and number two, they are unusual in terms of their structure and characteristics. This again you have to remember from the preliminary examination point of view. Second, when they were analyzing the genetic material from the bacteria, I repeat, when they were analyzing the genetic material from the bacteria that was present in the human gut, they have identified this particular new form life. Again, another prelims fodder that you have got. Remember, the statement can be that when did this particular bacteria has been identified and understood during their research. Remember, this has been identified when there was analysis that has been done over the genetic material from the bacteria that was present in the human gut. Remember, when we said that they are simple, there are already known simple so-called unusual life forms that we know. And in fact, we do not know whether they can be termed as life forms or not. So it is little ambiguous even for me to use that expression. However, I am using it because the author has used it. So these unusual forms of life are already been identified. One in the form of what is called as virus, identified way back, and then another one referred to as viroids. These particular obelisks somewhere lie in between in terms of the scale of simplicity between these viruses and viroids. It is another aspect that you have to keep in mind. So when you are referring to the so-called scale of simplicity, what is that we are referring to? We will see that in the next slide. As you move ahead, clearly we find that the viruses have been discovered in 1898. We know this. And as they have been discovered, what you saw is in terms of structure, there is some specificity. As you clearly know that genetically, we have certain structure wherein the basic unit of life referred to as cell has what is referred to as nucleus, and within this nucleus you see the existence of all the genetic material either in the form of DNA or in the form of RNA. With respect to virus, what you saw is they are composed of just a nucleic acid, that is either DNA or RNA, which is referred to as the nucleic acid core, and this is serving as their genetic material. This is the first aspect. Second aspect, with respect to virus, I repeat, with respect to virus, you find that this genetic material is surrounded either by a protein coat, and in few cases you also find that either it is surrounded by a lipid or fat layer outside of that particular coat. This makes up the structure of the virus. Except this, there is nothing. As this structure is there, now it has created a life cycle for itself over years of evolution. What is that life cycle? The first thing that they do is they infect a host cell. That means characteristically they are a host dependent organisms. Again, I am using this expression organism because the author has used it. We do not have any specific expression to use, and I don't know whether to call this organism or not. We are using this nomenclature for the sake of understanding the particular topic. So, in fact, as I said, they infect a host cell. Second, as they infect the host cell, then only the virus will be in a position to use the machinery of the cell. I repeat, it will be using the machinery of the cell to make more copies of themselves. And then what they do is they infect a new cell to repeat this particular cycle. This is how they expand themselves. So this life cycle is clearly telling you that on the one hand, they are host dependent creatures or organisms, and then on the other hand, they are also characteristic of what is referred to as parasitism. Third, if you look at the size of this particular structure, they are made up of few thousands of base pairs in RNA. But if you move to the next one which has been discovered, which is referred to as viroid in 1971, again they are composed of structurally what is referred to as RNA. However, they are distinct from virus in the sense that neither they have the protein coat, nor this protein coat is surrounded by the lipid layer, nor even they are not surrounded by the lipid layer alone. This is the distinction between the viroid and the virus. In this sense, viroid is generally seen as more simplified or simplistic organism structurally than even the virus. Second, just like the virus or similar to virus, they also enter a cell as RNA, and then they force the cell, as you see, to make more copies of itself. Again, you are seeing that they are host dependent. They also are showing these characteristics of what is referred to as parasitism. Then these new RNAs would then infect the other cells, and thereby they multiply themselves. However, again, in terms of size, structurally, they are made up of merely 250 to 400 base pairs in RNA, and they are circular RNA. This is what viroids as structure have, and in this sense they are distinct from the virus. But functionally, as you see, they are similar to the viruses. On the other hand, this new research which has discovered this what is referred to as obelisks, they have base pairs which are around 1000. This is where they lie in between this virus and viroid. Second, similar to viroid, they also have the circular RNA, but have more than the base pairs that you see structurally within viroid. However, what is their life cycle and what sort of structure that they have, all these have to be still explored. And now it is very fascinating to know what was the means by which the scientists in Stanford University could discover these particular obelisks. As you clearly see, the technique that they have adopted is referred to as the next generation sequencing. Just imagine yourself in a room where you are seeing number of papers on the floor, and all these papers are tore from a particular book that you have read. Then when you are trying to gather all these papers and organize them, it would be easy for you to organize because sequentially you know what is the content and how this content has been written and presented. However, imagine another situation wherein you have lot of pieces of papers lying on the floor. However, you have not read that particular book. In the absence of page numbers, it would be difficult for you to organize these papers in a collated manner, in a sequential manner. This would be possible only when, the organizing these particular papers in a sequential manner would be possible only when you read the content and you organize them in such a way that what comes next once you read a particular para. Given this particular exercise and understanding this analogy, and if you apply this to the next generation sequencing, what translates is this. What we do in this next generation sequencing is that you have lot of genetic information that has been gathered, but this entire information is in bits and pieces, and hence simply, as you saw in the earlier example, whatever the information you have in the form of torn papers, it is also generating large amounts of data. Now you feed this data to the computers, just like you go through your computer called brain through these papers to understand and organize them in a sequential way. The computers would piece together this complete information sequentially. So if the genome sequence of an organism is already known, just like the information that you might have read in the book, it would be easy for you to assemble them together. However, in this particular case, it is all about these bits and pieces of information. So this Stanford team could discover these obelisks when they were analyzing RNA from lot of bacteria that were present in the human gut, and when they were looking for specifically what is referred to as viroid-like elements. The team has written a software script that would go through these RNA fragments, and then they could piece these RNA information sequentially in this particular exercise of assembling them together from a given point, such that they again come back to that particular point. So as you see this structurally is in the form of a circular genome or circular RNA. They have to come back to this particular point, traversing through this route. As they do this, they get what is referred to as the circular RNA genome. So the obelisks were present in the human gut, and also the oral bacteria, that is the bacteria that would be present in our mouth, from all 7 continents, meaning this research was applicable to all the landmass on this planet Earth, demonstrating their ubiquity. So what you see is obelisks are present ubiquitously across the continents. So this particular technique again has observed that both the organisms do have the circular RNA for genomes, and both of these viroids and obelisks which have shown this similarity has ended here, as we have already seen in the tabular column. This obelisk RNA was much longer because of the higher number of base pairs, number 1, and number 2, they have appeared to code for 2 proteins, neither of which bore any similarity to any unknown protein from any other life form. This makes it different from, as we know, viroid. So what is the limitation that we have with respect to these particular finding? What they saw is that while analyzing this RNA data from all the gut and also from the oral bacteria that has been put together, it was impossible for them to determine which bacteria actually was hosting this particular given obelisk. So what they did was they tried to repeat this exercise over the RNA data that they have collected from few bacteria which they have grown individually in the laboratory. In this way, what they could do is they could manage to link one particular obelisk to the bacterial species referred to as Streptococcus sanguinea, where this is commonly found in the human mouth. It is in this way they have identified that they might belong to the bacteria which are present in your human mouth. Having completed the discussion over the articles, we will now move to certain practice questions. Take these prelims practice questions. The first question is, consider the following statements regarding genome and related researches. 1. DNA structure was discovered by Watson and Crick in 1953. Second statement is, India sequenced its first complete human genome in 2006. Factually, both of them are correct and hence answer has to be the C. Moving to the second question, with reference to agriculture in India, how can the technique of genome sequencing, often seen in the news, be used in the immediate future? The first statement is, genome sequencing can be used to identify genetic markers for disease resistance and drug tolerance in various crop plants, which is the right statement. Second one is, this technique helps in reducing the time required to develop new varieties of crop plants. The second statement is also correct. The third statement is, it can be used to decipher the host-pathogen relationships in crops. All the three statements are correct and hence answer has to be D. Moving to the third question, consider the following statements about Simlipal Tiger Reserve. The first one is, it is a part of UNESCO World Network of Biosphere Reserves, which is a right statement. It is also a part of Elephant Reserve, which is also a right statement. Simlipal Tiger Reserve exhibits tropical evergreen features in its vegetation and ecosystem, which is the false statement. Hence, answer has to be 1 and 2 only, which is A here. Moving to the fourth question, consider the following statements. In India, the expenditure on research and development has been on a gradual upward trajectory over the last 20 years. The second statement is, a significant portion of R&D investment amounting to approximately 70% is sourced from the private sector. Which of the statements given above are correct? We know that both the statements are false. Hence, answer has to be D. Moving to the fifth question, with regard to Streptococcus sanguinea that was in the news recently, which one of the following statements is correct? A gut bacteria that causes diarrhea. B is a bacteria found in human mouth that is linked to obelisks. Third one is a bacteria found without any protein coat. And fourth is all of the above. Answer has to be B that we have discussed. Moving to the next question, look at this mains practice question. Discuss the impact of the learning without burden philosophy on the current educational reforms in India. You can introduce answer for this by writing how this learning without burden will enable a shift, which is paradigm shift from rote learning to a more holistic, child-centric approach to education. In the body, you can introduce the approaches which can ease such burdens, such as curriculum restructuring, assessment reforms like open book exams. And the impact can also be discussed where the holistic and multidisciplinary learning with a focus on conceptual understanding and also introduction to the experiential learning and integration of technology in education, where it also aids the student learn and understand and its application to the day-to-day problems has to be discussed. In conclusion, you can summarize that these reforms, along with prioritization in skill development, critical thinking and inclusivity, brings transformation in the system of education that we are practicing, which is in tune with the constitutional mandate. That's all for today, students. We'll be meeting again with new edition tomorrow. If you like this video, please do like, share and comment on the video, and also don't forget to subscribe to our channel Narayana IAS.